all good. Maybe I'll give some to somebody else. But honestly, yeah.
Well, that never happens. You never feel like you've got everything you need.
Well,
I think even
feel
even
more
like
secure if I didn't have to take
I don't know where I put it. I'll put it about right here.
Yeah, $4,000 a semester. That's how much it costs me to go to school. So
That's
I
not
think
bad.
At UA.
Wait, how many classes are you taking?
Oh yeah, true. 5.
Oh,
Yeah, I want to graduate on time, so you have to take 5.
you take 4.
That's how many I'm taking right now. 5, but you won't get done on time. So I'm like, I don't know why they classify that as full
If
time.
you take 7, you can get it done almost half the time.
Yeah, I have to take 6.
Or take 14 and just get it done in 3 months. I know one of my friends who's taking 8 classes right now at the middle college.
There you go.
Holy crap, really?
3 night classes, yeah.
I took 6 and that was killer, and it already sucks enough. I'm gonna take 6 again.
I'm
Yeah,
taking 5, but one of my classes is like a 300 class or something, so I get extra.
How many credits is one of
Which one? Oh, I think she's getting like 20 something credits this
If
semester.
she's taking 8 classes, she's probably taking 20.
Yeah.
Hey, man.
I love your jacket. Thank you. That's cool. Yeah. Mr. Jamison, is this week, like this Thursday?
Oh, are you done?
Is this Thursday?
Yes, and Friday.
Oh, it's Friday?
Is it extra credit?
right here.
Oh, perfect.
Sure.
How was your?
I think the debate team might be going to see this on Friday.
The lecture is Thursday night, and I guess it's more of a discussion on Friday if you want to go. But there will be food on both occasions. One is up in the library, the other one's in the campus bookstore.
Yeah, I think the debate team's going to see it Friday after practice, or like some of us are. The Friday one, I just know that it was like Chinese philosophy.
Interested in his interest, I'm just not sure I'm going to make it because it's cold.
It's cold. It's icy.
Oh, yeah, that too.
No problem, sir.
Although it's supposed to snow Thursday, so that might happen.
It's
Is it
actually,
supposed to
my
snow?
phone is saying it's supposed to snow right now.
Oh god.
And I'm like,
There's a 30% chance.
Oh no.
So if you hadn't heard this, I don't know, this is the philosophy department running this, so it's great if we get
Yeah, I know.
but
Even Mr. John.
it is interesting because his main interest is in translation issues between the Chinese and English.
You know what? You never responded to my email.
Yes, I did. Yes. Pretty sure.
Yeah.
Look up W.S. Jamison. You reply. I'm like completely current on my emails.
No, because 11-2 is the last one.
Well, so
And my answer was the best answer.
yes. What was it? I don't remember.
Dinosaur.
Oh yes. Yes.
And
I don't remember getting that one.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure, 'cause I thought
And I sent it right.
and
However, so the quiz question:
That's very accurate.
Who did God promise the land to? Considering we were discussing Nietzsche, who
I can't believe I
basically
screwed that question up. I was here and I didn't even like get that right.
What?
The question.
The answer was the dinosaurs. So.
Well,
Well,
yeah, but like I was like I don't know because even though I was sitting here, I just like forgot what we were talking about.
well, dinosaur was not what the
But it was
Hebrew
the
scripture
best
said
answer.
because they didn't know about the dinosaurs yet. And the Arabic versions of that story have Ishmael. So
The XXL.
So the point of my asking that was to frame the contention over the land, and obviously there's other reasons that people fight over land. imagine all the different reasons. But that does actually come up as one of the sticking points over Israel-Palestine, is that the Arabs believe that the land was promised to them by God, and the Israelis obviously believe that it was promised to the Jews. So it's interesting that both of them are Semites. Have you ever got into the issue of what it means to be an anti-Semite?
Isn't that like Nazis?
Nazis were considered anti-Semites. I would imagine not all of them, actually. Because Nazi means, of course, National Socialist. Certainly Hitler and members of his staff, etc., were all anti-Semites. It's kind of interesting that Eichmann may not have been an anti-Semite. He was just in charge of the Holocaust and was doing his job. So if you think about how Hannah Arendt interpreted his occupation, as the banality of evil, any of us would have done the same thing in his position, basically. He was just doing his job. His job just happened to be administering the entire, the trains, the camps, all that sort of thing. Does that mean he's an anti-Semite? But my puzzle is that a lot of articles and things claim that the Arabs are anti-Semites because they hate the Jews. Not all of them, obviously. Not all of the Arabs hate Jews, but there are clearly Arab groups that feel that Jews ought to be killed, one reason or another. And the press refers to them as anti-Semites. And that sounds silly, since they are Semites. You can't be an anti-Semite if you are a Semite. Is that right? The Semitic. So I've actually engaged people in this discussion, and as far as they're concerned, the reason you can be an anti-Semite for hating the Jews, even if you're an Arab, is because that's not the way the word has been used. The word has been used strictly with regard to the Jews in Europe. But lately, of course, with members of people from Syria and other places who are Islamic migrating to Europe, a lot of anger has built up there over that. Very similar, of course, to what we have going on in the United States with regard to migration. There seems to be a roughly 50-50 split over that conflict. Yes?
Has it died down since the war of 1967, or is it rising back up?
Anti-Semitism? Well, there was a gentleman, do I call him a gentleman, that attacked the synagogue in Pittsburgh just the other week. And killed 11, and his claim for why he was doing this was, I just want to kill Jews. I think that's officially anti-Semitism. And that's kind of, and it's absolutely puzzling. I mean, if I look at, let's say, the history of migration to the United States, or to the colonies, even, most of the early colonies were individuals that fled Europe because the European elite educated classes did not allow them to flourish the way they thought they should, because they clearly weren't as educated and elite as they thought themselves. And so the Europeans said, well, here's an open country, you go there. And they did. They figured, okay, well, we can set up our our kingdom up on the the hill, the light, the beacon, the light, because what they wanted to do was start a religious colony based on their interpretation of, say, the Bible, which basically meant that they didn't understand what reading was, because if they thought, well, the way it means what it does to me is the correct meaning and everybody else is wrong.
Was this back when everybody read out loud in their head?
I don't think they were reading out loud. Well, I mean, they certainly could do both at the time. That's more in the Middle Ages.
Okay.
I think that happened. But so if you think about it, the groups that came over were relatively anti-intellectual, anti-scientific, actually, right? The science and the intellectuals in Europe were moving away from religion, and still are, by the way, right? If you live in France, you have to be secular. It's like national law. So if you're out and about, you're supposed to only give the appearance of being secular. You're not supposed to have like a outfit on that indicates a particular religious attachment. Nuns are allowed still because they were kind of grandmothered in, I suppose, if you think of it that way. But by the way, the topic today is identity and Appiah. So if you think of Kwame, Appiah, Wikipedia, it's much more informative than his own page. That could be a joke. So he's a philosopher. As you can see, his father was from Ghana. His mother was British. Granddaughter of royalty, actually. So he was raised in both places, England. Most of his schools were in England. He's got his degrees in philosophy from England. We can listen to him. Let's do interesting. This is, I think, a TEDx talk, not a TED talk. So if you look at the format, you see it's different. I think that's why. It says TED Salon. This is New York, 2014. But it is relatively short. This TED talk's there.
People say things about religion all the time. The late, great Christopher Hitchens wrote a book called God is Great, whose subtitle was
Actually,
Religion Poisons
The book
Everything.
was God is Not Great. I don't know why.
In Time magazine, Rabbi David Walker, who I gather is referred to as America's rabbi, said to balance that against that negative characterization, that no important form of social change can be brought about except through organized religion. Now, remarks of this sort on the negative and the positive side are very old. I have one in my pocket here from the 1st century BCE by Lucretius, the author of On the Nature of Things, who said, Tantum religio potuit suadere malorum. I should have been able to learn that by heart. Which is, that's how much religion is able to persuade people to do evil. And he was talking about the fact of Agamemnon's decision to place his daughter Iphigenia on an altar of sacrifice in order to preserve the prospects of his army. So there have been these long debates over the centuries, in that case actually we can say over the millennia, about religion. People have talked about it a lot, and they've said good and bad and indifferent things about it. What I want to persuade you of today is of a very simple claim, which is that these debates are, in a certain sense, preposterous, because there is no such thing as religion. about which to make these claims. There isn't a thing called religion, and so it can't be good or bad. It can't even be indifferent. And if you think about claims about the non-existence of things, one obvious way to try and establish the non-existence of a purported thing would be to offer a definition of that thing and then to see whether anything satisfied it. I'm going to start out on that little route.
Remember Wolf's argument that there is
if you
no
look in the
meaning,
dictionaries and
such
if
a
you
thing
think
as
about
meaning,
it,
so the
one
question
very
is,
natural
the
definition
meaning of life
religion
is
that it involves belief
misleading
in
question.
gods or in spiritual beings.
Same kind of British
As I say, this is in many dictionaries, but you'll also find it actually in the work of Sir Edward Tyler, who was the first professor of anthropology at Oxford, one of the first modern anthropologists. In his book on primitive culture, he says the heart of religion is what he called animism, that is belief in spiritual agency, belief in spirits. First problem for that definition is from a recent novel by Paul Beatty called Tough. There's a guy talking to a rabbi. The rabbi says he doesn't believe in God. The guy says, "You're a rabbi, how can you not believe in God?" And the reply is, "It's what's so great about being Jewish. You don't have to believe in a God per se, just in being Jewish." So if this guy is a rabbi and a Jewish rabbi, and if you have to believe in God in order to be religious, then we have the rather counterintuitive conclusion that since it's possible to be Jewish rabbi without believing in God, Judaism isn't a religion. That seems like a pretty counterintuitive thought. Here's another argument against this view. A friend of mine, an Indian friend of mine, went to his grandfather when he was very young, a child, and said to him, "I want to talk to you about religion." And his grandfather said, "You're too young, come back when you're a teenager." So he came back when he was a teenager, and he said to his grandfather, "It may be a bit late now because I've discovered that I don't believe in the gods." And his grandfather, who was a wise man, said, "Oh, so you belong to the atheist branch of the Hindu tradition." And finally, there's this guy who famously doesn't believe in God. His name is the Dalai Lama. He often jokes that he's one of the world's leading atheists. But it's true, because the Dalai Lama's religion does not involve belief in God. Now you might think this just shows that I've given you the wrong definition, and that I should come up with some other definition and test it against these cases and try and find something that captures atheistic Judaism, atheistic Hinduism, and atheistic Buddhism as forms of religiosity. But I actually think that that's a bad idea, and the reason I think it's a bad idea is that I don't think that's how our concept of religion works. I think the way our concept of religion works is that we actually have a list of paradigm religions and their subparts, right? And if something new comes along that purports to be a religion, what we ask is, well, is it like one of these, right? And I think that's not only how we think about religion, and that's, as it were, so from our point of view, anything on that list had better be a religion, which is why I don't think an account of religion that excludes Buddhism and Judaism has a chance of being a good starter, because they're on our list. But why do we have such a list? What's going on? How did it come about that we have this list? I think the answer is a pretty simple one, and therefore crude and contentious. I'm sure lots of people will disagree with it, but here's my story, and true or not, it's a story that I think gives you a good sense of how the list might have come about, and therefore helps you to think about what use the list might be. I think the answer is European travelers, starting roughly about the time of Columbus, started going around the world. They came from a Christian culture, and when they arrived in a new place, they noticed that some people didn't have Christianity, and so they asked themselves the following question: what have they got instead of Christianity? And that list was was essentially constructed. It consists of the things that other people had instead of Christianity. Now, there's a difficulty with proceeding in that way, which is that Christianity is extremely, even on that list, it's an extremely specific tradition. It has all kinds of things in it that are very, very particular, that are the results of the specifics of Christian history. And one thing that's at the heart of it, one thing that's at the heart of most understandings of Christianity, which is the result of the specific history of Christianity, is that it's an extremely creedal religion. It's a religion in which people are really concerned about whether you believe the right things. The history of Christianity, the internal history of Christianity, is largely the history of people killing each other because they believe the wrong things. and it's also involved in struggles with other religions, obviously starting in the Middle Ages, a struggle with Islam, in which again, it was the infidelity, the fact that they didn't believe the right things, that seemed so offensive to the Christian world. Now that's a very specific and particular history that Christianity has, and not everywhere is everything that has ever been put on this sort of list like it. Here's another problem. A very specific thing happened. It was actually adverted to earlier, but a very specific thing happened.
With respect to the point he just made about the creedal nature of Christianity, a terrific book that really does a great job explaining that and contrasting it with other things, like, for example, Native American Indian religions, is the book God is Red. Have you ever heard of that? God is Red. And the author, Vine Deloria, have you ever heard of him? He's written some other things. Custer died for your sins, I think. If you ever get the chance.
In the history of the kind of Christianity that we see around us, mostly in the United States today, and it happened in the late 19th century. And that specific thing that happened in the late 19th century was a kind of deal that was cut between science, this new way of organizing intellectual authority, and religion. If you think about the 18th century, say, if you think about intellectual life before the late 19th century, anything you did, anything you thought about, whether it was the physical world, the human world, the natural world, apart from the human world, all morality, anything you did would have been framed against the background of a set of assumptions that were religious Christian assumptions. You couldn't give an account of the natural world that didn't say something about its relationship, for example, to the creation story in the Abrahamic traditions, the creation story in the first book of the Torah. So everything was framed in that way. But this changes in the late 19th century, and for the first time it's possible for people to develop serious intellectual careers as natural historians like Darwin. Darwin worried about the relationship between what he said and the truths of religion, but he could proceed, he could write books about his subject without having to say what the relationship was to the religious claims. And similarly, geologists increasingly could talk about. In the early 19th century, for a geologist who made a claim about the age of the Earth, they had to explain whether that was consistent or how it was or wasn't consistent with the age of the Earth implied by the account in Genesis. By the end of the 19th century, you can just write a geology textbook in which you make arguments about how old the Earth is. So there's a big change, and that division, intellectual division of labor occurs, as I say, I think, and it sort of solidifies, so that by the end of the 19th century in Europe, there's a real intellectual division of labor, and you can do all sorts of serious things, including, increasingly, even philosophy, without being constrained by the thought, well, what I have to say has to be consistent with the deep truths that are given to me by our religious tradition. So imagine someone who's coming out of that world, that late 19th century world, coming into the country that I grew up in, Ghana, the society that I grew up in, Asante, coming into that world in the turn of the 20th century with this question that made the list. What have they got instead of Christianity? Well, here's one thing he would have noticed. By the way, there was a person who actually did this. His name was Captain Rattray. He was sent as the British government anthropologist, and he wrote a book about Asante religion. This is a soul disc. There are many of them in the British Museum. I could give you an interesting, different history of how it comes about that many of the things from my society ended up in the British Museum. but we don't have time for that. So this object is a soul disc. What is a soul disc? It was worn around the necks of the soul washers of the Asante king. What was their job? To wash the king's soul. It would take a long while to explain how a soul could be the kind of thing that could be washed. But Rattray knew that this was religion because souls were in play. Similarly, there were many other things, many other practices. For example, every time anybody had a drink, more or less, they poured a little bit on the ground in what's called the libation, and they gave some to the ancestors. My father did this. Every time he opened a bottle of whiskey, which I'm glad to say was very often, he would take the top off and pour off just a little on the ground, and he would talk to he would say to
My culture, that would be
Command him,
considered
the founder
sin.
of our lives, or the Appiah, my great uncle, he would do so. Offer them a little bit of this. And finally, there were these huge public ceremonials. This is an early 19th century drawing by another British military officer of such a ceremonial, where the king was involved, and the king's job, one of the large parts of his job, apart from organizing warfare and things like that, was to look after the tombs of his ancestors. And when a king died, the stool that he sat on was blackened and put in the royal ancestral temple. And every 40 days, the king of Asante has to go and do cult for his ancestors. That's a large part of his job, and people think that if he doesn't do it, things will fall apart. So he's a religious figure, as Rattray would have said, as well as a political figure. So all this would count as religion for Rattray. But my point is that when you look into the lives of those people, you also find that every time they do anything, they're conscious of the ancestors. Every morning at breakfast, that you can go outside the front of the house and make an offering to the god tree, then I meet you outside your house. And again, you'll talk to the gods and the high gods and the low gods and the ancestors and so on. This is not a world in which the separation between religion and science has occurred. Religion has not been separated from any other areas of life, and in particular, what's crucial to understand about this world is it's a world in which the job that science does for us is done by what Rattray is going to call religion. Because if they want an explanation of something, if they want to know why the crops has failed, if they want to know why it's raining or not raining, if they need rain, if they want to know why their grandfather has died, they're going to appeal to the very same entities, the very same language, talk to the very same gods about that. There is no, this great separation, in other words, between religion and science hasn't happened. Now, this would be a mere historical curiosity, except that in large parts of the world, this is still the truth. I had the privilege of going to a wedding the other day in northern Namibia, 20 miles or so south of the Angolan border, in a village of 200 people. These were modern people. We had with us Una Chaplin, who some of you may have heard of, and one of the people from this village came up to her and said, "I've seen you in Game of Thrones." So these were not people who were isolated from our world. But nevertheless, for them, the gods and the spirits are still very much there. And when we were on the bus going back and forth to the various parts of the funeral, they prayed not just in a generic way, but for the safety of the journey, and they meant it. And when they said to me that my mother, the bridegroom's mother, was with us, they didn't mean it figuratively. They meant, even though she was a dead person, they meant that she was still around. So in large parts of the world today, that separation between science and religion has occurred in large parts of the world today. And I say, these are not. This guy used to work for Chase and at the World Bank. These are fellow citizens of the world with you, but they come from a place in which religion is occupying a very different role. So what I want you to think about next time somebody wants to make some vast generalization about religion is that maybe there isn't such a thing as a religion, such a thing as religion, and that therefore what they say cannot possibly be true.
What do you think? Any comment?
Religion can be anything, therefore it has no definition.
Or multiple definitions. So I would argue that we can come up with a definition. This is my definition of religion. And in that definition, I argue that in order to define religion, what we have to do is say that it's belief in a meta-narrative. The story that explains why everything is the case, basically. And further, I would argue that to be a human being and be able to make choices, you have to have a meta-narrative that frames your values, your choices, etc. So in that sense, even those individuals that claim to be not religious, so for example, like Richard Dawkins, is actually, for me, is extremely religious. Because he gets angry with other people that have a religion that's different than his religion, which is belief that there are no religions except science, which for Richard Dawkins is the way you should properly think about everything is through science. And by the way, I would disagree with even the way he framed science, because of course to be a good scientist requires a value system, which strictly speaking in our tradition would not be science, but would instead be the property of a religion, right? So it's pretty easy for me in the way I frame what religion is to say that, you know, basically everyone is religious, with maybe the exception of the person that's so despondent by their lack of meaning in life that they're even willing to kill themselves because of that. So in a sense, a person can become suicidal because they don't have religious beliefs, right? Because then, why do anything, right? Well, of course, the problem with that is, well, why even kill yourself? Because that seems to be a response to a value that it would be better to be dead than to live this way.
And that
right?
almost does seem religious. That could be seen as religious.
Right, right. But of course, what I'm doing is I'm taking a very extreme sociological point of view of how we should define religion, recognizing that, for example, a lot of people, when I ask, you know, so what is religion? And a lot of people will say belief in God. Well, of course, that's precisely with what Anthony Appiah is talking about with regard to our Western tradition. You know, if you're a Christian, you would think, well, one of the most important parts of your religion is believing in God, right? You know, that's, but as the Dalai Lama correctly points out, he doesn't believe in God. Buddhism traditionally doesn't believe that there is a God. Instead, there's the everything, right? You know, so it's just everything in one big, yes.
In the video, I don't like when he was talking about like his premise for his argument on why there isn't religion, because there aren't, like, everyone's interpretation is different, but then he went on to say like there is no God. Like, I don't really know that his explanations, or the ones that he like provided just then, were really that convincing of why he didn't believe in God. Like, by the end of the video, I was still like waiting for like the argument, and like I don't know if he just didn't like get like the punchline in, but I think that your argument, which is kind of the similar process of saying that there's everything is so different, there's so many different definitions, but he said that there is no religion, and you said that everything's religion. So I just think it's different, interesting how you went through it similarly, but you got such like polarized conclusions.
Well, I've spent so much time in my life studying religions that it would really piss me off if there wasn't one.
Did he say that there was no God, or did he say that when someone says something about religion, it might not be true because there is no religion?
Well, I think he would.
Goes back to your
I think his
the
point was
definition
there's
of God.
religions without gods.
Right. So by
Those two arguments really.
so by talking about religions and saying there isn't such a thing, I think I mentioned Wolf. Remember when she talked, what is the meaning of life? She says it's a dumb question. There are meanings in life, but there's no meaning. Remember how she did that?
Yeah.
In the meaning of lives or whatever. When you get to the point, and I think this, of course, is the way our current academic view of language is, that there are lots of different contexts. The meaning of words are dependent on the particular context, as Wittgenstein called them, the forms of life. And as a result, for him to argue and for Wolf to argue there's no such thing as, what they mean is, well, it's such a variety of meanings that it doesn't make sense to say religion doesn't, it's because of religion, or it's because of the meaning in your life, right? That doesn't have an adequate linguistic referent so that people can discuss it properly. We've kind of, in a sense, done away with that kind of reference in meaning, and instead you have to be aware that you're talking about lots of different possibilities. The OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, has tons of meanings for practically every word as far as I know, unless it's not one that's used very often. Like equilateral, that might be just pretty specific, but for the most part, our language has become more and more ambiguous. There's great things about that, by the way. We might think about Steven Pinker in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, where he argues that this is the least violent period of human history, and the reason for it is because we've learned to read about other cultures, and so we don't think of other people as enemy. We don't think of my identity and their identity is so drastically different that I need to kill them, but instead we begin thinking of all of us as basically the same kind of human beings with different kinds of identities because of the linguistic context that we find ourselves in. So we shouldn't get excited, as Appiah says, over the religion. It's instead politics that could become the more important aspect of your identity. Well, so it's the ambiguity in life that's basically changed things. If you think of it this way, right? And there's so many different meanings, we shouldn't get all concerned about one particular meaning. And there's so many different definitions of religion that, in a sense, there is no religion. And yes, I argue just the opposite. I think we can zero in on, say, the need for a meta-narrative in your life in order to say that's what gives you a religion. By the way, that doesn't even require you to know it. So there are a lot of people in the world that I think are still taken care of by that definition who don't realize that they're believing in a meta-narrative. They just really believe that there's a God. And that God is, has a specific, or might be multiple gods, for example, in the Hindu religion, right? So they believe a particular meta-narrative, they just aren't aware that they're believing in a meta-narrative. The advantage of being a young American today and growing up in a society like ours is that you know that people that believe in religions are believing in a story. They believe that story is relevant to them, and they believe that the values in that story are good values, better than the values you believe in because you believe in a different story, right? So we still can think of religions and cultures as competing with one another, absolutely. If I'm thinking of the conflicts we have here in Alaska, of course, we've got lots of individuals that have grown up in traditions that seem to be in drastic conflict with what we might call the dominant culture, what is that? What is the dominant culture in Alaska? Caucasian, Northern European, English-speaking, maybe Christian? What do you think? Do we have something that could really define our dominant culture? What do you think you have to believe in order to be part of our modern population in Alaska? What sort of things are required beliefs?
I think there's so much diversity you couldn't hone in on any single thing.
That could be, because as we've spread our culture out more and more, the more you become aware of other cultures, that becomes, as Steven Pinker argues, by learning about all those other cultures, we no longer want to kill those people, because we realize, hey, they're human like us. So I don't frame, who they are by calling them a specific name, Jewish, I want to kill Jews. That guy who, unfortunately, I guess you're familiar with him, right? They just had in the paper that he's, I guess he's going to go on trial, but he's currently being held in jail on a real high, bail, whatever, so they won't let him out. Shucks. No, not shucks. It's a good thing he's locked up, right? We all agree. Sorry, that's just really disappointing that that kind of stuff still happens in our country, but it does, right? What do you think about the, Judge Corey, I think, has been kicked off the bench, right? Are you familiar with what just happened over that? That was just yesterday, of course. He was, I think the only judge that's ever been kicked off of the bench because of the decision he made concerning the man who, I don't want to describe what he did. Does everybody know what he did? The guy that, no? Okay, rather than looking it up and stuff. He basically picked up a native woman who was hitching a ride, and instead of taking her, is this bad?
No.
Should I? Okay, I saw signals going back. And I thought, oh, I'm in trouble now. No. But he basically picked up a native woman. Instead of taking her where she wanted to go, he took her to I think Wisconsin Avenue, to the dead end area of Wisconsin Avenue. Started to strangle her, and said he was going to kill her. She fainted, but she did wake up. He didn't actually kill her. He said later he just was trying to scare her, because by having her scared to death like that, that's what would make him. Yes, thank you. From keeping me from having to say that. Did everybody, can you say that louder? No. That's interesting. It's okay to whisper it, but not to say it out loud. And so she woke up with him doing that on her. And by the way, in this state, there's no law that says bringing someone into contact with semen without, and not Navy people, the other kind, is not against the law. It's not against the law for you to do that to someone. So guess what? It ended up being just assault. He didn't even get a kidnap charge or anything. As a result, for a year while he was waiting for the trial, he was confined with one of those bracelets, whatever you call them.
Ankle monitor.
Ankle monitor at his parents' home in Homer. And I guess he stayed there for the year. And then he's put on trial. And basically, the woman who charged him couldn't be found by the lawyers, although a reporter found her within hours on Facebook afterwards, right? But they ended up, Judge Corey basically was in a situation where the only thing he could do was what the plea bargain basically came to, and that was that he would get just the 1 year jail term, and that would already have been covered by his time with the ankle monitor, and so he was freed, basically. No further punishment, basically, right? And by the way, it wasn't even a sex crime. It was an assault, right? So he was freed after all of that by Judge Corey. And the argument from the legal point of view is that Judge Corey's hands were tied. There wasn't anything else he could do. And that's what basically any other judge would have done in like circumstances. But it caused an aroused public who were upset with the way the justice system worked to kick him out of his position, and apparently yesterday that succeeded. Why did I bring that up? Anybody remember? It's upsetting. But so we get lots of these upsetting kinds of things, obviously. Shooting 11 people
Oh,
in a synagogue.
talking about Alaska's like beliefs. Or,
Yeah, what are our central beliefs?
I mean, it's Portland to the most diverse state in the U.S. So, for a bad example, fine.
Well, I mean, we ought to be able to find something. Education, everybody should be educated,
Yeah.
but exactly what should be in the education, that's a good question. Right? But when we have this conflict between, say, individuals that are raised in a village culture and the dominant culture, it seems pretty obvious to them that the dominant culture is destroying village life. And I remember talking to a gentleman named Korshakov in a village. He was an elder, and he said, the schools are destroying our town. The schools are destroying our village. And the reason for it is, of course, the more the youth in the village become educated, the less interest they have in staying in the village. That seems pretty clear. And so they move instead to Anchorage, which is the largest native village in Alaska. Right? But then, and a lot of them, by the way, become absolutely fantastic. I think of Willie Hensley. Willie Hensley. I don't know if you've met him or read his book, 50 Miles Beyond Tomorrow. Is that the title? Are you familiar with him? Miles from tomorrow. But one of the significant points he makes in that is that when he was a child, his family, when it came summertime, and the tradition in summer is to go off to fish camp and spend the summer at fish camp, catching fish and bringing, smoking them or whatever, drying them, and then bringing them back home for the winter, right? Well, when the family got back to home, what they discovered was that during the time that all the native members of the community had left town to go to fish camp, the white community put all of the property of the town on sale, had an auction, sold it to the highest bidders for really low amounts. So by the time all the native families came back, they discovered that their town had been sold, and they no longer had their houses. They had been given to the purchasers of the community. So they basically lost all their homes. That was absolutely the plan, right? They knew where everybody was. Their argument, well, I mean, we posted it. We posted the auction. You should have read it, and then showed up for the auction and put a bid in on your house. Yeah, what? Yeah, that's just absolutely ridiculous. But of course, the natives had no leg. By the way, they weren't even citizens. When did Alaska natives become citizens? Anybody know offhand?
It's like Bilbo Baggins. Comes back and everyone's
Yeah,
auctioning
everybody's
stuff.
selling all his stuff. Become U.S. citizen. 1924. And this happened before that, I believe. So amazing, right? By the way, just this year, people that lived on reservations in North Dakota and used the P.O. box at the reservation as their address were told that they could not vote with an ID card that had a P.O. box listed as their address. So basically, all the natives living on the reservations were disenfranchised from voting. The reason for that, because the previous election, they had elected a Democrat by just a few votes. So the Republicans knew that if they changed the law and wouldn't allow people to vote with the post office box as their address, that would reverse and they would have a Republican in office again. And to fix that, by the way, the Supreme Court agreed with that law and said it was okay, not a problem. And so the natives instead got all together and gave everyone a new address, gave everyone a street address on the reservation in time for them to all vote. So I'd be curious to look that up and see how the voting what it did there. So that's kind of interesting. So there's clearly, say, a dominant culture that's imposing its will on cultures that are not part of that mainstream. But what is that dominant culture?
I don't know. It's hard to like characterize it, but I would say like the majority of the dominant culture, at least in Alaska, values more like commercial interests and like interests for land preservation. Not everyone, but like the whole no on one movement. That's just what I was referring to. At least more than the natives do.
That's kind of interesting because what did I do with Willie's? Going back to Willie's book, actually. I thought the most interesting chapter was the chapter after he had succeeded. He became a lawyer, was a member of the legislature, was involved in ANCSA being approved, which gave the natives corporations. Right? But corporations have, as their main concern, the commercial value of the shares and the profits of the corporation. Their main interest, we often hear this, and it might actually be true, and that is that a corporation's main value is the value of the shares and the profit to their shareholders. You've heard that, I'm sure. Well, Willie was involved in setting up those corporations, which, by the way, replaced the tribes, right? So we don't have that, but of course the tribes are still there, and of course there's been a conflict between the tribes and the corporations ever since. And in the chapter, I remember he had finished and succeeding in this. By the way, a lot of natives are really angry with him for making that possible, for supporting that, because the belief was that that would destroy the tribes, and that essentially would destroy the natives. And by the way, a lot of white businessmen thought that this will be terrific because what will happen is they didn't really want the natives to have their properties, they didn't want them to have money, and they thought they're already trying to kill them off with alcohol, which, as you know, is still an ongoing process. Conspiracy theory, right? But meanwhile, by the way, that goes back. The Conestoga wagons going west, one of the things they all brought with them, if they could afford it, was cases of whiskey, because everyone agreed that that was the best defense against the Indians, because if the Indians attacked you, instead of shooting at them, what you did is you gave them whiskey, and they would take the whiskey, go out, get drunk, and never bother you again. So whiskey was a good offensive weapon in the winning of the West, right? And they used the same thing in Alaska. The ship captains brought whiskey, and they knew once they gave that to the natives, that kind of like took the natives right out of the picture. And it still does, of course, because if you're raised by, born to a mother who's on alcohol, that means that you're going to have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I would argue that roughly 25% of the population of Alaska has that, and that makes it impossible for you to become an active member of the dominant culture.
I heard that Native Americans have more susceptibility to alcohol addiction since it wasn't in their timeline until just recently, and so that's one of the reasons why they would have such an issue with it, especially in Alaska.
I've heard that. Of course, that's quite complex, figuring that out. It's a genetic issue. But the other argument I've heard about that is that they actually have no cultural training on how to handle alcohol. Of course, there are alcoholics in the immigrant, the Western traditions too, right? You look at the difference between the elites and the non-elites. One of the main characteristics is that the elites have traditions that they pass on to their young that, for the most part, not always, but limit the handling of alcohol. Not sure that really works at Harvard. But the idea, of course, is that you're not going to have a good life if you're not controlling your addiction to alcohol. But of course, the non-elites end up being destroyed by the same situation, right? And I've heard it, that in elite homes, you have a liquor cabinet. And you might even have a key to that, so that, like, the kids can't get into it, unless, of course, they know where the key is, right? But so you have a bottle of something, and you have some, and then you put it away, and then later on you might have another some, like another day or something, right? So you have like a little one shot a day or something. Which, by the way, doctors actually have told me that that's actually probably good for you, right?
I've also heard some stuff saying that no alcohol ingestion is good for you.
I've heard that too, right?
So I don't think there's nothing about it.
Or caffeine. There's a lot of things that we seem to drink a lot, eat a lot, right? But if you think about it, by having like stores of various types of alcohol and only having a little bit at different occasions, that's totally different than when you give kind of warriors a case of whiskey and they have no cabinet, they have no, they don't, the teepee maybe, but that's movable. So it's not like they can really store this stuff and move it around or keep it in a wine cellar or something of that sort. Instead, the tradition among them, that grew up among them, was that they would take the case of whiskey out and drink it until it was gone, which could actually kill some of them, right? Definitely take them out of commission for quite some time, right?
I feel like it's probably both, because like most things in psychology are both nature and nurture. So
I agree with that completely. Yeah. So there's definitely cultural training that goes with that. Plus, if you're addicted to it, it's pretty hard to stay off of it. In any case. So, I suppose the main thing that we're looking at with Appiah's article, and how do I tie that in with Christina Hoff Sommers? What did any of you look at that? Did you survive it? Because that was horrible. It's not Christina Hoff Sommers' fault. This was one of those cases where the crowd basically didn't want the invited speakers to speak, and so did their best to try to quiet them and insult them. And yet at the same time, there were a couple members of the panel that I thought were absolutely insulting to everybody in the world. Should I go back to that? So these are the three characters. This guy is famous for being absolutely horrible.
Children had white partners, they were called out for their privilege, and they formed a separate group. And new identities emerged. A group of women with allergies formed, and they issued a set of demands telling us not to wear dry, clean clothing or hairspray. And it was a victimology. It was a victimology spinning out of control. It was a victimology devouring itself. Now, I I was there, I ended up bonding with a group of radical lesbian separatists. I don't have that identity, but they all smoked, and by the end of the conference, I needed a cigarette. That was 1992. These eccentric women and other like-minded colleagues would spend the next 25 years using their classroom to help students see the world the way they did. At the same time, they were writing articles, books, attending conferences, task force, working groups, just a tsunami of activism. And they developed a
Interesting.
set
You
of
can see some of
advocacy
my
statistics.
identity thanks to Google trying to remind me of the things I like. You know.
1 in 4 women will be raped. 2 in 3
fact, the
battered.
red line tells
Cheated
you
out of
whether I've watched
25% of their
any of it or
salaries.
not.
And that's only if they're not already dead from an eating disorder in vain efforts to meet patriarchal standards of beauty. All of these claims are reckless exaggerations. And they have been repeated so often, they are now, in some places, beyond.
Opinions. They're your opinions from your gender studies professor, and the really reason you picked it was because you thought it was your best chance in getting laid. You just decided to walk on in to try and pick up chicks at the San Francisco retread pot-smoking drum circle, only to realize that your very glance in the direction of a woman causes a barren womb. How do you think this is gonna get better? No. Is he gonna check his privilege? That's
mercilessly forgiving this guy on platforms. Hate speech, this is bigotry, he's a racist, how dare you put this man on TV. The BNP.
Oh, that was a clever one.
What happened, of course, as anyone with any brains would be able to predict, was that the BNP evaporated. When British people saw what the guy who ran this party was really like, they stopped voting for that party. A couple of years later, the BNP is no longer a force in British politics. This is why it is...
So, just for 3 of them speaking, he's actually, I picked a really good spot. That was safe. He didn't say one cuss word or anything that, but that stuff is...
Look at her face.
Yeah, I think she felt very uncomfortable there, because she is actually the only sane member of this panel, in my point of view, right? And one of the main reasons I even picked this out as a interesting video. But what's going on here is this. This is at which university? University of Massachusetts. So what we've got apparently at a lot of universities, not this one, is we've got a lot of students that absolutely are going crazy, in my opinion, over their identities and what they want to hear, because the vocabulary that's spoken around you, if it's contrary to what you framed your identity to be, is offensive today. So,
well, Erwin Chemerinsky, who's like the dean of Berkeley Law School, he like spoke at UAA a couple weeks ago, and he talked about this like student invited speakers who have really controversial opinions coming onto college campuses, and like free speech as it like pertains to non-violent speech. Like no one's like inciting violence here, but people are still really offended. And the argument that he made is that like, or at least one of my coaches made, was that it's not that it's like the ideas themselves, like those can be seen as offensive, but that's not why students don't like it or are having such like a visceral reaction. But it's that they're like in such, a lot of them are in such like disregard of actual facts and actual statistics and knowledge, and it's like so narrow, and it's like they're creating their own justification for their own arguments, which goes against like the academic pursuit of a like college, like an institution, and that's kind of why it's so visceral, and students just don't know how to say that, so it looks really bad. And yeah, so it's not really like that they don't want to hear what they don't want to hear, although that could be it, but it's just that a lot of these speakers disregard what colleges are trying to do. Yeah.
And by the way, Christina Hoff Sommers, she's the author of Who Stole Feminism, the war against boys, One Nation Under Therapy, which is this one. Yes.
I'd say it's important to get your opinions challenged because that's how you build up your actual opinions.
Yeah.
When you have people like this, like Milo Yiannopoulos as an example, he's a provocateur. All he does is piss people off. That's his main job. The reason why he's so good at it, he's eloquent, he's able to like make these arguments out with flawed logic, and most people aren't good enough to fight up against it.
Yeah.
And so, if we don't expose to these kinds of people and let them speak, we're not going to know like how our views really lie. We're not going to know how to express our views either. I think there's a lot of effort like pushing away these voices that we don't agree with, even though they may have some points that are right, no matter how much you want to admit it or not.
Well, I would argue that our science-based culture, which has included social sciences, has adopted the attitude that there's no right or wrong, there's instead different cultural interpretations of what is right or wrong. And that's correct. That's a correct interpretation of where values come from, so that they're embedded in social cultural practices. So I mean, it's pretty clear that that's absolutely the case, really. That doesn't mean that there isn't a right or wrong, though. In fact, if we were to argue that different cultural practices are better than others, that certainly seems to require that there be a right and wrong, and that the one culture is righter than the other one, and to the extent that it practices those characteristics as opposed to the other. So if we look, say, at native cultures in Alaska and compare it to whatever we might say that dominant Western European culture is in Alaska that's destroying them, we would say that, well, the reason their own children end up become attracted to that dominant culture is because there's characteristics of that dominant culture that are superior to the culture from the community. There's stuff, consumerism, right? If you want consumers, you want the ability to make money so that you could buy a lot of things that are even popular in the villages, like the ATVs, all-terrain vehicles, right? Guns. That's a Western invention, actually. I don't know of any native village that makes their own weapons, guns, right? You have to buy them from Mattel, the toy maker. Sorry, but you get the idea, right? Those are Western imports, right? Same problem, by the way, as far as the Middle East, as far as I know. While they can make some things like bazookas and things, homemade things, for the most part, even the parts for those have to be bought from European countries where they can be manufactured. But the attitude that social sciences gives you towards culture also instills a particular ethic in the social science practitioner, the nurses, the school teachers, the individuals that are kind of the carriers of that modern tradition. And that, whether they realize it or not, the belief is that you're supposed to be appreciative of all of the different cultures to a certain extent. You're supposed to be, as the French prefer, they call it laïcité, right? Which just means lay, basically, right? Let's say that the people as opposed to the theologians, right? So you have to be secular, right? Remember, secular is now, whereas the eternal is when you go to church, that puts you in connection with the eternal because you feel like you're one with, kind of like the Buddhist all, right? but then you leave the church and now you're back in the now, and you have to like buy breakfast and take your daughter to the airport because she's got to get back to work. All those kinds of things that you have to do in the now, right? So laicite, you have to be now. You have to be secular. You have to be scientific. And so the French are really great at tolerating all of these folks that come to France. You're allowed to come, you're Islamic, fine, but by your next generation, or even in 20 years from now, you've got to speak French, you've got to believe what the French believe, and that's a dominant cultural point of view. The same kind of thing we're kind of trying to think about, I am, about what is the dominant culture in Alaska, right? You have to accept those things and give up your Islamic beliefs, or you're not French. Even the way you name your children, if you name them the way your previous culture did, and you don't give them French names, that really upsets a lot of French people. That was in the paper just the other day. I think I mentioned it even, right? So.
Isn't that like the same thing how if you live in France, unlike we do in America, they're not like, oh, I'm 60% German, 20% Swedish, you're just French.
Yeah, I heard that. I feel like Americans are the
Well,
ones to do that.
it's I think that's part of the acceptance of toleration for I asked my mom once, what are we? And she said, well, you're English, Irish, Swedish, German, and French. And I said, oh, well, so where? And she says, why do you want to know that for? They're all dead. Right? So there's two things. The one is, okay, so we used to have all these cultures, right? As a matter of fact, I've felt deprived of culture, which is a culture. In my family growing up, we have no traditions that we absolutely feel like we have to pass on, to the next generation. In fact, that hasn't succeeded. They're their own people. I have no idea how they ended up liking the things they do, and off they went, right? Doing their own thing. But I'm not living anything like what my parents thought, except, I have a nice house. They came out and they visited the one year, and as they walked around the neighborhood, said, you have a nice house. The parental seal of approval, You moved into a nice neighborhood, you have a nice house, etc., right? Okay, so that's kind of cultural. But for the most part, if I compare myself to Alaska natives who can trace their family back thousands of years, basically, right? Whoa, to this spot, to this place, that I can't even grasp what that would be like. Sure.
Well, I feel like looking at the video of the people and talking about the kind of culture of ideas, like what spurs, like how is that being created? I feel like there's been like an academic kind of culture within like our institutions that it's so exclusive for so long, like the access to information. And now with the internet, everyone can like find places where they adhere to. So like it's kind of a reaction of like social media and the internet and exposure to things that everyone can identify with something.
Well, let me ask this as a quiz question. Do you find your internet access enables you to look up things that are very different than what you've studied before? I mean, does it give you opportunities to see things that are very different points of view? Or do you feel like you use the internet primarily to stay within groups who all believe the same thing that you do?
Probably the second one.
And I think it's a problem because, as you saw with Google gets to know what I'm interested in, and when I do a search, I'm pretty sure that they're showing me only the things that they think I'm already interested in. So that I don't know that I could use Google to search things that are totally contrary to the point of view that I already have in my search, so that I don't know that I can actually find out things that would disagree with my own point of view.
But sometimes don't even show links to certain websites that are popular.
Can you say that again?
Sometimes don't even show like a link for sites that are pretty common. That used to be on the front
And
of the page.
Facebook and others, Google too, are trying to like restrict certain things because they don't want people to be offended. They don't want to get legally in trouble, etc. France, if you post certain things, you could be fined and jailed, for anti-Semitic things, right? There's certain things in France, they don't have the freedom of speech that is an issue for us. And it's still a problem for us because I'm pretty sure, even though my vocabulary in class has changed because of a lot of the words I've heard students routinely use, like I've actually used the word fuck in class. I could not have imagined saying that just last week, But I've actually heard people say it constantly, sometimes, in every sentence. So I thought, okay, so they won't even hear me speaking unless I use that word occasionally? We heard a word this morning that one individual in the class used that, I would not have said.
Blank, okay? God. Where's our first question?
Just ask it.
Oh.
I'm not sure I could do it again, actually. The question, though, is do you use the internet? And is this part of our dominant culture that you're not attached to a tradition? You're on your own. You have to create your, kind of like Nietzsche, you have to create your own values. But boy, that makes it really difficult to feel like you belong to a specific group. Unless you belong to a bunch of lesbians that hate men and love to smoke.
Thank you, Mr. Jamison.
Thank you.
No burritos today, huh?
No burritos? Did I?